The sound came first, sharp, final, like steel cables snapping under load that was never meant to be tested. Then the second sound followed, wetter, the kind that makes combat medics flinch because they know exactly what it means. Bone separating from socket, ligament tearing through cartilage, the organic architecture of a human joint dismantling itself under pressure it was never designed to withstand. 301 Navy SEALs stood motionless in the open-air arena, boots planted, arms frozen mid-cross, every eye locked on the training mat where two operators, who had walked on confident, now lay writhing in a kind of pain that transcended vocabulary. They couldn't scream, couldn't form words, just guttural sounds that came from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. The nervous system's raw response to catastrophic injury. And the woman standing between them looked like she had just finished a warm-up drill. Not a bead of sweat visible on her forehead, not a tremor in her hands. Breathing steady controlled the rhythm of someone running through a checklist rather than standing over two broken men. Her expression hadn't changed from the moment she'd lowered herself to the mat in textbook-prone restraint posture. Clinical, focused, entirely present. Staff Sergeant Reese Crawford stood at parade rest, boots aligned, hands clasped loosely behind her back. 32 years old, 5'7", 140 pounds. She looked small standing in the center of that arena, dwarfed by the metal risers surrounding her on three sides, dwarfed by the 301 men, watching with expressions that ranged from shock to something approaching religious awe. A younger SEAL in the back row broke the silence with a whisper that carried across the still air. "What the hell just happened?" No one answered, because the men who understood what they had just witnessed were still processing the gap between expectation and reality, between the assumptions they had carried into this demonstration and the evidence now groaning on the mat in front of them. This wasn't entertainment. This wasn't theater designed to check a diversity box or satisfy some Pentagon mandate about integration. This was the moment 301 operators learned that the most dangerous person in a room might be the one they had underestimated. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. 6 hours earlier, none of them knew her name. Let's go back. The wind off the Atlantic came in bursts that afternoon, sharp, wet, heavy with salt that left a film on everything it touched. It hissed through the metal catwalks of Triton. Proving Grounds, a secluded naval training facility perched on a rocky peninsula where the coastline bent hard against the ocean, like a fist pressing into flesh. Waves slammed into the cement bulwarks with rhythmic violence. The sound was constant, relentless, but it was distant now, muted beneath the rising hum of tension building inside the primary drill enclosure. The CH-47 Chinook descended through low clouds, rotors chopping the air into thick pulsing beats that vibrated through bone. Inside, Staff Sergeant Reese Crawford sat with her gear bag between her boots' hands, resting on her knees, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. She didn't look out the window. Didn't need to. She had seen enough coastlines in her career, enough bases where men gathered in tight formations to prove things to each other, enough places where the unspoken rules mattered more than the written ones. The pilot's voice crackled through her headset. 30 seconds. Reese nodded once. She reached down and tightened the strap on her duffel with the precise economy of movement that came from years of knowing chaos could arrive in an instant, and preparation was the only margin between survival and disaster. The skids touched down on the landing pad with a jolt that rattled her teeth. She unbuckled, slung the bag over one shoulder, and stepped out into the wind. The rotors were still spinning noise, making conversation impossible. She kept her head down and moved toward the admin building, boots crunching on gravel. No one was there to meet her. That was fine. She didn't need a welcoming committee. Inside the building was cinder block and fluorescent light. Cold, functional. A petty officer sat behind a desk, glanced up as she entered, studied her rank insignia for a beat longer than necessary, then returned his attention to the computer screen in front of him. "Sergeant?" "Staff Sergeant," Reese corrected quietly. "Staff Sergeant Reese Crawford." He typed something, slow, deliberate, like he was searching for a reason to make her wait. "You're the medical response instructor. Logistics medical response. Cross-branch certified." He didn't look up again, just slid a folder across the desk with 2 fingers. Key cards inside. Barracks C, third floor. Briefing at 1600 in the operations center. She took the folder. Thanks. The petty officer said nothing. Behind her as she turned toward the corridor, she heard him pick up a phone. Heard him murmur something she couldn't quite make out. The tone was enough. She had been on enough bases to recognize when she wasn't wanted. The barracks were standard issue. Narrow hallways lined with metal doors, each one bearing nameplates that listed 2 or 3 occupants. Most of them anyway. Hers had one name. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. Small room, single bed, desk, locker. Window overlooking the training grounds where she could see rows of obstacle courses stretching toward the tree line in the distance. She set her duffel on the bed and unzipped it with care. Everything came out in order. Fatigues, boots, medical kit, training harness. She hung the fatigues in the locker, placed the boots beneath them, with heels aligned, and set the medical kit on the desk. Then she reached into the bottom of the duffel and pulled out something wrapped in dark cloth. She unwrapped it slowly, deliberately. A knife. Not military issue. Older. The blade was 7 inches of double-edged steel, blackened with age but meticulously maintained. The handle was wrapped in cord that had been replaced multiple times over the years. The pattern precise, functional. A Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife. British commando design. World War II heritage. Her father's knife. Colonel Garrett Crawford had carried this blade through Operation Desert Storm in Kuwait in 1991, through the Battle of Mogadishu in Somalia in 1993, through a dozen deployments in Iraq that he had never talked about in detail, never bragged about, never used to claim authority over anyone. He had just carried it, used it when necessary, and then when Reese turned 14, he had started teaching her how to use it too. Not for killing, for surviving. She set the knife on the desk beside a small frame photograph. The photo showed a man in Marine dress uniform standing at attention. Eyes forward, strong jaw, gray just beginning to show at his temples. The kind of face that looked like it had been carved from something harder than flesh. Colonel Garrett Crawford, 1991. Taken just after Desert Storm. He had died in 2018. Heart attack, 61 years old. The doctor said it was years of wear on a body that had been pushed beyond normal human limits for 3 decades. Scar tissue in his lungs from smoke inhalation. Joint damage from parachute landings and ruck marches. Micro fractures in his spine that never fully healed. The price of service. Reese sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the photograph. She didn't pray, didn't talk to the dead. But she allowed herself one quiet moment to remember the man who had taught her everything that mattered. Then she noticed something on the floor near the door. A piece of paper. White. Folded once. She stood crossed, the room picked it up. The handwriting was blocky, anonymous, written with a heavy hand that pressed deep into the paper. They're setting you up. Protocol won't protect you here. Your father knew what Harlow was. They buried him too. Reese read it twice. Then she folded it again and slipped it into her pocket. She didn't know who had left it. Didn't know if it was a warning or a test or psychological warfare designed to destabilize her before the evaluation even began. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever wrote it wasn't wrong. The memory came unbidden as she stood there, note in hand. 18 months ago, the North Atlantic in winter. 200 nautical miles off the coast of Greenland, the water was black and cold enough to stop a human heart in under 3 minutes. The wind howled across the surface in sheets of spray that froze before they could fall back to the ocean. And beneath the waves, the pressure was immense, crushing the kind of weight that turns steel into scrap metal if the welds weren't perfect. The joint NATO training exercise had been running for 6 days. 3 nations, 12 vessels, 42 divers rotating through subsurface breach simulations in conditions most sane people would call suicidal. But that was the point. You didn't train in comfort. You trained in the worst environment you could create so that when the real worst arrived, you were already familiar with its shape. Staff Sergeant Reese Crawford was part of the medical support team attached to the U.S. contingent. She wasn't there to dive. She was there to patch up the ones who came back broken, to stabilize injuries until they could reach a surgical suite, to make the calls that determined who got evacuated first when multiple casualties arrived at once. But on day 6, when the mini-sub carrying 8 operators lost power at 180 feet and the internal pressure blew a seam in the aft compartment, she became a diver whether she wanted to be or not. The call came over the emergency channel at 0430. Structural collapse, flooding, multiple casualties. All divers accounted for but 2 trapped in the aft section, with water rising and the hatch jammed from external pressure differential. Reese was in her rack when the alarm sounded. She was dressed and moving before the second tone finished. Medical kit, dry suit, rebreather. She was on deck in under 2 minutes. The dive coordinator was shouting into his headset, face pale breath, visible in the freezing air. The backup team was already in the water, but the situation was deteriorating fast. The mini-sub was too deep for a rapid ascent. The hatch was stuck, and the 2 divers inside were running out of time with water filling the compartment at a rate that gave them maybe 8 minutes before they drowned. Reese didn't wait for orders. She clipped into the descent line and dropped. The cold hit her like a physical blow. Even through the dry suit, even with thermal layers beneath the North Atlantic, tried to pull the warmth from her body with fingers that felt like they were made of ice and malice. She ignored it, focused on the line, on the depth gauge, on the calm chatter in her ear that was growing more urgent with every passing second. 100 feet, 120, 150. The mini-sub came into view below her, a dark shape against darker water. Emergency lights still flickering inside like dying stars. She could see the backup team working on the hatch with cutting torches. Sparks drifting sideways in the current, beautiful and useless. She reached the hull and pulled herself along the exterior until she found the secondary access port. It was smaller, tighter, designed for equipment transfer rather than personnel. But it was open. She squeezed through. Inside was chaos compressed into a space the size of a closet. Water halfway up the compartment and rising, 2 divers floating near the ceiling. Masks fogged, breathing hard through their rebreathers. One of them had his hand clamped to his chest. The other had both hands wrapped around his thigh, blood seeping between his fingers and dispersing into the water in dark ribbons. Reese's brain shifted into a different mode. Not panic, not fear, just sequence. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. She grabbed the first diver, the one holding his chest. His eyes were wide, panic, the whites visible around the edges. She pulled his hand away and felt along his ribs through the wetsuit. There, broken rib. She could feel the displacement, and beneath it the telltale resistance of air, trapped where it shouldn't be. His lung was collapsing. She reached into her kit and pulled out the needle decompression assembly, 14-gauge catheter. She found the second intercostal space by touch alone, positioned the needle and drove it through the wetsuit and skin in one smooth motion. Air hissed out. Pressure released. The diver gasped, his eyes focused, clarity returning as his lung began to reinflate. She held the catheter in place and turned to the second diver. The leg wound was worse, much worse. Femoral artery compromised. He was losing blood fast, the water around his thigh dark, despite the cold that should have slowed the bleeding. She had maybe 90 seconds before blood loss sent him into shock, maybe 3 minutes before it killed him. She grabbed her belt rig, stripped it off, and looped it around his thigh, as high as she could get it just below the hip joint. She cranked it down with both hands, using the buckle as a tourniquet, tightening until the bleeding slowed from a flood to a seep. Not stopped, just slowed. Good enough. The water was still rising. They had maybe 60 seconds before it reached the ceiling. The comms crackled in her ear. Backup team has the hatch. 30 seconds. She looked at the 2 divers, both stable enough to survive extraction. But if she signaled for the hatch to open now, if the backup team pulled them through before the pressure equalized between the flooded compartment and the open water outside, the rush of water could destabilize the entire structure, could trap the backup team, could kill everyone. She made the call. Hold extraction. Let the compartment equalize first. The voice on the comms came back sharp, urgent. They're at critical oxygen threshold. I know. You'll drown. Not if you move fast. Silence on the line, then reluctant professional. Acknowledged. She stayed, held the needle catheter in place with one hand, held the belt tourniquet with the other, watched the water creep up past her shoulders, past her neck, past her chin. The two divers were breathing through their rebreathers, eyes locked on hers, trusting her, believing she knew what she was doing, believing she had calculated this correctly. The water reached her mouth, her nose. She took one last breath and ducked under. 15 seconds. 20. 30. Her lungs started to burn. 45. 60. The edges of her vision began to go gray, reality softening at the periphery. 75 seconds. Then hands grabbed her, pulled her up, pulled her through the hatch into open water, into the impossible luxury of movement and space. She surfaced, gasping, choking, alive. The two divers surfaced beside her, both alive. On the deck of the support vessel, they wrapped her in thermal blankets and checked her vitals. Hypothermic, oxygen deprived, but functional. She had been underwater without air for 93 seconds. 73 seconds longer than protocol allowed. Long enough that most people would have panicked, would have thrashed, would have inhaled seawater and drowned in the last moments before rescue arrived. She had stayed still, stayed calm, trusted the math and the training and the backup team to execute when the moment came. One of the divers she'd saved was Petty Officer Kowalski. The other was Captain Thaddeus Blackwell, Jr., the three-star general's son. 1 week later, there was a private ceremony in a room with no windows. A Navy Commendation Medal was placed in her hand. The citation was classified. The incident was buried in a report that emphasized equipment malfunction and downplayed human factors. 2 days after that, Captain Victor Harlow called her into his office. Harlow was 51 years old then, tall, lean in the way men got when they spent decades maintaining combat readiness and then transitioned to desk work without adjusting their metabolism. Silver haircut, regulations short, the kind of officer who looked good in uniform and knew it. He had been a SEAL once 15 years ago, before an injury took him off the operational track and pushed him into logistics and procurement. He was the executive officer overseeing the NATO exercise. And he had a problem. Staff Sergeant Crawford, impressive work out there. Thank you, sir. He slid a document across the desk. Thick. Official. The kind of paperwork that carried weight. I need you to sign this. She picked it up. Read it. It was a modified after-action report. The language was careful, clinical, precisely calibrated. It attributed the structural collapse to unforeseen environmental factors and made no mention of the fact that the welds on the minisub had failed inspection twice before being cleared for deployment. Made no mention of the metallurgy analysis that showed substandard materials. Made no mention of the procurement officer who had signed off on the equipment despite documented concerns. She set the document down. This isn't accurate, sir. Harlow leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. It's accurate enough. It leaves out the equipment failure. Equipment failures are expensive, Sergeant. They require investigations. They delay operations. They make people nervous. He paused. People should be nervous if the equipment is failing. His expression hardened, the professional courtesy draining from his face like water through a sieve. You're a good operator, Crawford. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sign the report. Move on. Everyone benefits. She looked at him for a long moment. Studied the way he sat, the way he held his body, the micro expressions that flickered across his face when he thought she wasn't watching closely enough. This wasn't about paperwork. This was about exposure, about liability, about someone covering tracks that led back to decisions made months or years ago. Decisions that had put good operators in compromised positions with substandard equipment. She stood, came to attention, spoke clearly, loudly enough that if anyone was listening outside the office, they would hear every word. Sir, I won't falsify safety records. My father taught me that integrity isn't negotiable. Not for convenience, not for career advancement, not ever. Harlow's jaw tightened, muscle jumping beneath skin. You're making a mistake, Sergeant. Respectfully, sir, I don't think I am. She turned and walked out. 3 weeks later, her orders came through. Reassignment, Triton Proving Grounds, Medical Response Logistics Instructor, a punishment tour. Everyone who saw the orders knew it. Triton was where the Navy sent people who needed to be sidelined without the paperwork and attention of formal disciplinary action. Remote, isolated, a place where careers went to stall. But Reese didn't complain, didn't appeal. She just packed her gear, said goodbye to the few people worth saying goodbye to, and moved on. Because that's what you did when the system decided you were inconvenient. You took the hit, you kept your integrity, and you waited for the next fight. It always came eventually. Reese shook off the memory, looked down at the anonymous note in her hand. Your father knew what Harlow was. She pulled out her laptop, opened the encrypted folder her father had left her, the one she discovered 3 months after his funeral, hidden in plain sight as a shared cloud drive with a password that was her birthday. Inside were files, dozens of them, accident reports, equipment requisitions, financial documents, all carefully organized, all meticulously annotated in her father's precise handwriting. And at the center of it all, one name appearing again and again, Captain Victor Harlow, now Colonel Victor Harlow, the man who had tried to force her to sign a false report 18 months ago, the man her father had been investigating when he died. She opened one of the files, an accident report from 2014, a training exercise at Fort Bragg, a fast rope insertion gone wrong when the rope failed mid-descent. One fatality. Corporal Camden McKenzie, 20 years old, Marine Force Recon. The investigation concluded equipment wear and tear. No further action warranted. But her father's notes in the margin told a different story. Rope inspected 2 weeks prior, rated for 5,000 pounds, failed at 180 pounds. Metallurgy shows substandard synthetic fibers. Manufacturer linked to Harlow procurement contracts. Recommend full investigation. She opened another file. 2015, parachute malfunction, 1 fatality. Another file. 2016, dive equipment failure, 1 fatality, 6 files total. 6 deaths between 2009 and 2017, all involving equipment approved by Victor Harlow during his procurement rotations. All investigations closed with the same conclusion. Equipment wear and tear. Operator error, no further action warranted. Reese sat back in her chair, stared at the screen. Her father had been building a case, had been collecting evidence for years, had been preparing to blow the whistle on systematic corruption that was getting operators killed. And then he died. Heart attack, the official report said. Natural causes, nothing suspicious. But the anonymous note suggested otherwise. They buried him too. She closed the laptop, looked at her father's photograph. I'm going to finish what you started, Dad, she said quietly to the empty room. Whatever it takes. The sun was low when Reese walked out to inspect the base perimeter that first evening. Golden light slanting across concrete, shadows stretching long, distorted, reaching toward the ocean in the distance where waves continued their relentless assault on the bulwarks. She walked past training facilities that had shut down for the night, past barracks where operators slept or pretended to sleep, past buildings whose purpose she didn't yet understand. And then she saw it. A memorial plaque mounted on a stone marker near the old section of the base, bronze weathered green with age. The inscription was simple. In memory of those who served, Special Operations Training Facility, established 1982. Beneath it, smaller text, dedicated to the operators who trained here and gave their last full measure in service to their country. Reese stood in front of the plaque for a long time. The wind pulled at her jacket. The sound of the ocean was a constant presence, like breathing like a heartbeat. Her father had trained here. She knew that much from his service record. 1989, back when this place was just being stood up as a joint service facility for special operations candidates who needed environments that regular bases couldn't provide. He had been 28 years old, a Force Recon Marine with 3 combat deployments already under his belt. He had come here to learn things that would keep him alive in places where the normal rules of warfare didn't apply. And 35 years later, his daughter was standing in the same place carrying the same knife, facing the same choice he had faced again and again throughout his career. Do what's right or do what's easy. She pulled out the anonymous note again. Read it one more time in the fading light. Your father knew what Harlow was. They buried him too. The words carried more weight now. Standing here, in this place, where the past and present compressed into something that felt less like memory and more like prophecy. Footsteps approached from behind. Reese turned. A man stood 20 feet away, 63 years old, Gray hair cut military short, scars visible on his forearms where he'd rolled up his sleeves. Eyes that had seen too much death to be impressed by anything less than genuine competence. He moved with the careful economy of someone whose body had been through wars and come out the other side still functional, but forever changed. Master Gunnery Sergeant Dalton Mackenzie, retired. He looked at Reese for a long moment, then at the memorial plaque, then back at Reese. Garrett Crawford's daughter, he said. Not a question, a statement of fact. Yes, you look like him. Got his eyes. Got his spine, too, from what I hear. Reese said nothing, just watched him, waiting. Dalton stepped closer. Your father and I served together. Fallujah 2004. Mogadishu before that. He was the best Marine I ever knew, and I've known a lot of Marines. He paused. He told me about you. Told me he was teaching you everything he knew. Said you were tougher than half the operators he'd trained. He was biased. He was right. Dalton pulled a key from his pocket. Small, brass, old. Your father left something for you. Something he wanted you to find when the time was right. I've been waiting 6 years to give you this. He pressed the key into her hand. There's a bunker, old Cold War storage facility, east end of the base set into the hillside. That key opens it. What's inside? Your father wanted you to see it, wanted you to understand what he was fighting. Reese looked down at the key, then up at Dalton. You knew he was investigating Harlow. I was helping him investigate Harlow. Dalton's voice carried an edge now. Sharp, dangerous. Your father discovered a pattern of equipment failures linked to procurement fraud. He was building a case, and then he died. Heart attack. That's what they said. You don't believe it. Dalton met her eyes. Your father was 61, no cardiac history, ran 5 miles every morning, could do 100 push-ups without breaking a sweat, and then one day his heart just stopped. He paused. Victor Harlow was the investigating officer, ruled it natural causes in 36 hours. No autopsy, no toxicology, just signed the papers and closed the case. Reese felt something cold settle in her stomach. You think Harlow killed him? I think your father was about to destroy Harlow's career and his freedom. I think men have killed for a lot less. And I think the timing is awfully convenient. Dalton turned toward the bunker location. Come on, you need to see what your father left behind. They walked in silence through the fading light, past empty training areas, past the tree line, to a hillside at the eastern edge of the base where concrete met earth. The bunker entrance was exactly as Dalton had described it. Set into the hillside, concrete frame painted dull green. Heavy steel door with a keypad lock that hadn't been used in years. Reese tried the key in the backup mechanical lock. It turned smoothly. The door opened with a heavy click that echoed in the quiet evening. Inside, emergency lighting flickered on automatically, dim fluorescent tubes that somehow still functioned after decades. The space was larger than she expected. Rows of metal shelving units, storage crates stacked against walls, equipment covered in tarps, and at the far end a desk with a lockbox sitting on top. Reese crossed the bunker. Her boots echoed on concrete. She knelt in front of the lockbox and examined it. Steel, military issue, combination lock. She tried her father's birthday. Nothing. Her birthday. Nothing. Then she remembered. The date her mother died. The day that had changed everything. The lock opened. Inside were documents, photographs, USB drives, and a handwritten letter on yellow legal paper, the ink faded but still legible. She unfolded the letter, her father's handwriting. Reese, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. It means they got to me before I could finish what I started. And it means you're the only one left who can. In 2010, I discovered evidence of systematic equipment procurement fraud, substandard materials, falsified inspection reports, contractor kickbacks, the kind of corruption that gets operators killed. I filed a report with JSOC. It was buried within 72 hours. The investigating officer was Captain Victor Harlow. He's the connection. He's the one who's been protecting the contractor. He's the one who signed off on equipment that failed. And he's the one who made sure no one would ever prove it. I've been collecting evidence for 8 years. It's all in this box. accident reports, financial records, testimony from operators who survived equipment failures, everything you need. But I need you to understand something, sweetheart. This isn't just about exposing corruption. This is about the men who died because of it. This is about their families who deserve to know the truth. This is about making sure it never happens again. Harlow is dangerous. He's smart. He's connected. And he won't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatens him. Trust Dalton McKenzie. He's been helping me gather evidence. He lost his grandson to this. He understands what's at stake. Finish it. For the men who died. For the families who deserve answers. For your old man who tried and failed. Integrity isn't negotiable. Not ever. I love you. Dad. Reese read the letter 3 times, her hands steady, her breathing controlled, but something fundamental had shifted inside her. She pulled the documents from the box. 6 accident investigation files, each stamped with the same conclusion. Equipment wear and tear, operator error, no further investigation warranted, but her father's annotations told different stories, pointed out inconsistencies, included metallurgy reports that contradicted official findings, witness statements excluded from final reports, and financial records, bank transfers, shell company invoices, a paper trail leading directly to Victor Harlow. At the bottom was a photograph, 6 operators in dress uniform, young, proud, each with a red X marked across their face. She turned it over. Names and dates on the back. Corporal Camden McKenzie, 2014, fast rope failure. Private First Class Stephen Torres, 2015, parachute malfunction, Lieutenant Marcus Webb. 2016, dive equipment failure, Sergeant Aaron Voss. 2017, communication system failure, Specialist Grant Hollis. 2013, rappelling equipment failure, Petty Officer Second Class Jordan Blake. 2009, oxygen system failure, 6 men, 6 families, 6 lives ended because someone decided profit mattered more than integrity. Reese looked at the first name again. Camden McKenzie. She turned to Dalton, who had been standing silently near the entrance. Your grandson. Dalton's jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. 20 years old, best fast rope operator in his class. The rope failed at 180 pounds when it was rated for 5,000. They said it was wear and tear. His voice cracked slightly. I knew it wasn't. I just couldn't prove it. Not alone. He stepped forward, looked at the photograph. Your father and I spent 10 years collecting this evidence, waiting for the right moment, the right person with the right standing to bring it forward. He looked at Reese. That's you. You're the one who can finish this. Reese carefully repacked the documents, closed the lockbox. Harlow's here, at Triton. He arrived this afternoon as senior evaluation observer for my instructor qualification. Dalton's expression darkened. He knows you're Garrett's daughter. He has to. He investigated my father's death. He tried to force me to sign a false report 18 months ago, and now he's here positioned to oversee my evaluation. He's here to destroy your credibility before you can use it against him. That's what I figure. Dalton pulled something from his pocket, a challenge coin, worn smooth from decades of handling. On one side, the Marine Corps emblem, on the other, an inscription. Semper Fidelis. I carried this through the Gulf War, through Mogadishu, through 3 tours in Iraq. It represents a promise I made to your father, that we'd always watch each other's backs, that we'd finish what we started. He pressed the coin into Reese's hand. He's gone, but the promise isn't. You're not alone in this fight. Reese closed her fingers around the coin, felt its weight, its history. What's the play, Master Guns? Tomorrow you demonstrate competence that 301 witnesses can verify. You show them what the old ways can still do. You earn their respect. And then we force Harlow's hand, make him act publicly where he can't hide behind bureaucracy. If we can get those 301 SEALs to back you, his authority becomes irrelevant. Cultural weight overrides command position. Dalton looked at the documents one more time. Your father died trying to expose this. I've been waiting 10 years to finish it. Tomorrow starts the endgame. Reese stood, shouldered the lockbox. Then let's make it count. They walked out of the bunker together, The sun had set completely now, stars beginning to appear overhead, the sound of the ocean constant in the background. Tomorrow would bring 301 witnesses. Tomorrow would bring Victor Harlow watching from the risers. Tomorrow would bring the demonstration that would change everything. But tonight, standing in the darkness with her father's evidence in her hands and Dalton Mackenzie at her side, Reese Crawford made a promise to her father's memory, to Camden Mackenzie and the 5 other men who had died, to every operator who had trusted equipment that failed them. She would finish this, whatever it took. Integrity wasn't negotiable, not ever. The briefing room was half full when Reese arrived at 1550 hours. Rows of chairs facing a podium, a projector screen on the wall. Men in fatigues talking in low voices, some standing, some sitting, all of them watching her enter with expressions that ranged from curious to openly skeptical. She took a seat in the back row and waited. At exactly 1600 hours, General Thaddeus Blackwell entered. The room quieted instantly, conversations dying mid-sentence. Blackwell was a career officer, square-jawed, gray at the temples. The kind of man who commanded respect without needing to demand it, whose presence alone was enough to shift the energy in a room. Gentlemen, and Staff Sergeant Crawford. A few heads turned, eyes flicked toward her. She kept her expression neutral, hands folded in her lap. Blackwell continued, tomorrow at 0800 hours, we will conduct the annual Constraint Survival Readiness Audit. This is a demonstration and evaluation of advanced escape and neutralization techniques applicable to high-risk entrapment scenarios, subsurface environments, confined spaces, hostile pressure conditions. He clicked a remote. The projector displayed a diagram of a human body in prone position with restraint points marked in red. Our instructor for this evolution is Staff Sergeant Crawford. She has been cross-certified in constraint survival protocols and has operational experience in subsurface rescue and trauma response. He paused. Let that sink in. The demonstration will be observed by all 301 Navy SEALs currently in rotation at this facility. Reese felt the weight of that number settle in her chest. 301. Not a handful of instructors, not a single platoon. The entire current rotation. Every operator on base. Blackwell advanced to the next slide. This morning's drill will demonstrate close quarters reversal under simulated subsurface entanglement conditions. Staff Sergeant Crawford will perform live demonstrations of release and neutralization techniques applicable to medics or divers trapped under hostile pressure. He paused, scanning the room. Protocol is as follows: controlled speed, no competitive force application, clear safety boundaries. Volunteer attackers will simulate entrapment conditions. The instructor will demonstrate escape and neutralization techniques. This is not a test of strength. This is a test of technique and precision. Another pause, heavier. Let me be clear. Each maneuver is approved. All force will be controlled. The purpose of this session is to observe efficiency, not brute execution. He looked directly at Reese. Staff Sergeant Crawford is also the reason 2 men are alive after a structural collapse off the coast of Greenland 18 months ago. One of those men is my son. The murmur died instantly. The silence that replaced it was absolute, suffocating. Reese didn't react, just continued looking straight ahead as if public validation from a 3-star general was irrelevant to the work she needed to do. Then the door at the rear of the room opened. Every head turned. Colonel Victor Harlow stepped inside. 54 years old, silver hair, dress uniform with enough ribbons to impress civilians who didn't know better. He moved with the practiced confidence of a man who had spent 30 years learning how to project authority in rooms full of people who actually earned theirs through blood and competence. General Blackwell, apologies for the interruption. I'm here as Senior Evaluation Observer. Command felt it appropriate to have oversight representation, given the cross-branch nature of this assessment. Blackwell's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition, calculation, the subtle recalibration that happened when an unexpected variable entered a controlled environment. Colonel Harlow, welcome. Harlow moved to the front of the room, positioned himself beside Blackwell. When he turned to face the assembled SEALs, his gaze swept across the crowd and stopped on Reese. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for her to see the cold promise behind his professional courtesy. long enough for her to understand exactly what his presence here meant. He hadn't come to observe. He had come to watch her fail. Near the back corner of the room, partially obscured by a support column, Dalton Mackenzie stood with arms crossed. His expression was neutral, but his jaw was tight. When Harlow's attention moved past Reese and continued scanning the room, Dalton caught her eye and gave the smallest shake of his head, a warning, or maybe just confirmation of what she already knew. Blackwell concluded the briefing. Questions? Silence? Dismissed. The room emptied quickly, men filing out in clusters, conversations resuming as soon as they cleared the doorway. Reese stayed in her seat, letting the crowd thin before standing. In the hallway outside, two men were talking. Both tall, both built like they spent more time in the gym than anywhere else. She recognized the patches on their fatigues. Neptune team, known for brutal waterborne breach training, known for egos to match. The first man, barrel-chested with a thick neck, glanced at her as she passed. His name tape read, Colton. What's she going to teach us how to duck? The second man, leaner but coiled with sinewy muscle, smirked. His name tape read, Morrison. This is diversity theater. Watch. She'll fold in 30 seconds. Reese kept walking. Didn't look back. Didn't respond. She had heard it before. Different base. Different men. Same words, like they were all reading from the same script someone had written decades ago and never bothered to update. Let them talk. Tomorrow they would see. The evening was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that preceded storms. Reese sat at the small desk in her quarters, the documents from her father's lockbox spread in front of her. 6 accident reports, financial records, bank statements showing regular deposits to offshore accounts, shell company invoices that trace back to a single contractor, and always at the center of it all, one signature, Victor Harlow. She had spent 3 hours cross-referencing dates, following money trails, building timelines, and what emerged was a pattern so clear, so methodical, that it stopped being about individual incidents and became something else entirely, a system. Harlow hadn't just signed off on bad equipment once or twice. He had built an entire procurement pipeline designed to funnel contracts to a single manufacturer who paid him kickbacks. And when that equipment failed when operators died, he had used his position to bury the investigations, to rewrite reports, to ensure that every death was categorized as operator error or equipment wear, rather than what it actually was. Murder by bureaucracy. A knock on her door pulled her from the documents. She glanced at the clock. 21:30 hours. She stood crossed to the door, opened it. Dalton Mackenzie stood in the hallway, a folder tucked under his arm. We need to talk, not here. She nodded, grabbed her jacket, followed him out. They walked in silence through empty corridors, past training facilities that had shut down for the night, past barracks where operators slept or pretended to sleep while processing what tomorrow would bring. Dalton led her to a small maintenance building at the edge of the facility, unlocked the door with a key that looked like it had been in his pocket for years. Inside was storage equipment, cleaning supplies, a space that existed in the bureaucratic blind spot where important things could be discussed without electronic surveillance or official record. He closed the door locked. It turned to face her. Harlow didn't come here by accident. He requested this assignment 3 weeks ago, before your evaluation was even scheduled. Reese felt something cold settle in her stomach. He knew I was here. He's been tracking your career since you refused to sign his report 18 months ago. Waiting for an opportunity. When your instructor qualification came up, he saw his chance. Dalton opened the folder he'd been carrying. Inside were documents that looked like they'd been photographed from classified files. I've been calling in favors, reaching out to people who owe me. What I found goes deeper than equipment contracts. He pulled out a photograph. 8 men in combat gear standing in front of a Humvee. Desert background, Iraq based on the terrain. Operation Copper Dune, 2011. Anbar Province, Iraq. Harlow was commanding officer of a SEAL team conducting raids against insurgent logistics networks. His team was using new communications equipment that he had personally approved during his procurement rotation the year prior. Dalton's finger traced across the photograph, stopping on 4 faces that had been circled in red marker. The equipment failed during a coordinated ambush. Encrypted comms went down. The team couldn't call for air support or coordinate with adjacent units. 4 men died in a kill zone that should have been survivable if they could have requested immediate extraction. He pulled out another document, an after-action report. Harlow filed a report blaming enemy action and equipment wear from field conditions. He recommended the contractor for additional orders based on field performance under extreme stress. The investigation cleared him. He was promoted to procurement oversight specifically to prevent future equipment failures. Reese studied the photograph. The 4 circled faces, young men who had trusted their equipment, trusted their commander, trusted the system. But the equipment didn't fail from wear. It failed because the components were substandard, counterfeit chips sourced through a supply chain that paid kickbacks to procurement officers who looked the other way. Dalton set the folder on a workbench, his scarred hands spread flat on either side. That we can prove 6 training deaths over 5 years. Operation Copper Dune puts it at 10 total, but there could be more incidents where equipment failure was blamed on operator error or enemy action. We'll never know the real count. And he's been covering it up for 13 years, covering it and profiting from it. The contractor he protected paid him over $1.6 million in consulting fees between 2008 and 2017. Reese looked at the documents, the faces of dead operators, the paper trail of corruption, the signature that appeared again and again. My father filed a JSOC report in 2010. Harlow made sure it never reached anyone who would investigate. When you refused to sign the North Atlantic report, you became the first real threat to his entire operation in 15 years. Dalton met her eyes. He's not here to evaluate you, Crawford. He's here to destroy your credibility before you can destroy his. Reese was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out Dalton's challenge coin, turned it over in her fingers. What about the email? Dalton nodded grimly. I saw Colton and Morrison check their phones during the briefing. Both received a message at the same time. Encrypted app. I couldn't see the content, but the timing is suspicious. You think Harlow sent them instructions? I think Harlow is very good at maintaining plausible deniability. He won't order them to hurt you. He'll use coded language. Something like maintain standards or don't let shortcuts compromise the teams. Something that sounds reasonable on the surface, but carries an implied directive. Reese stood, paced to the small window overlooking the dark training grounds. So tomorrow, Colton and Morrison escalate beyond demonstration parameters. I either fail by letting them dominate me, or I respond with force, and Harlow uses it to paint me as unstable. That's the play. Unless I change the game. Dalton raised an eyebrow. Section 7.3 of the training manual, live response authorization. If attackers violate demonstration protocols, the instructor is permitted to use necessary force proportional to the threat. You'd need witnesses to verify the protocol violation. I'll have 301 witnesses. Dalton smiled slowly. It was not a kind smile. Your father would be proud. The next morning came cold and clear. Reese woke at 0500 exactly as she had every morning for the past 14 years. She ran 5 miles on the perimeter trail. Standard morning routine. The physical exertion helped clear her mind, helped her focus on what mattered rather than what she feared. By 0630, she was back in her quarters, showered, changed into fresh fatigues. She stood in front of the small mirror above her sink and looked at herself. 32 years old, 12 years of service, more deployments than most operators twice her age. A Navy commendation medal she wasn't allowed to talk about for an incident that was still classified, and none of it would matter today. Today, the only thing that would matter was whether she could demonstrate competence in front of 301 men who had already decided what they thought of her. She reached for her father's knife, wrapped her fingers around the handle, felt the weight of it, the balance, the history. Precision over power, she said quietly to the empty room. Every engagement, her father's voice, his words, his legacy. She secured the knife in its sheath at her belt. Then she picked up the challenge coin Dalton had given her. Gulf War era, worn smooth from decades of handling. She slipped the coin into her pocket. Then she walked out to face 301 witnesses. The arena was already filling when she arrived at 0745. 301 Navy SEALs assembling in the metal risers, standing in formation, tight rows, arms crossed, faces hard. The collective energy of men who had been told they were the best and had spent years proving it, now being asked to watch a woman demonstrate techniques they thought they had already mastered. Reese walked to the equipment staging area and began her final inspection. Training harness, simulated tangle net, padded flex cuffs, standard constraint drill equipment. She laid each piece out with care, checked straps, tested buckles, verified that nothing had been tampered with since her earlier inspection. The murmur of voices was constant now, not loud, not overt. Just the low hum of 300 men deciding whether she belonged here, whether she was competent or a diversity checkbox, whether tomorrow would vindicate their assumptions or force them to reconsider beliefs they had carried for years. She didn't try to win them over, didn't make eye contact or offer reassuring smiles. Just continued her work with methodical precision, treating the preparation with the same seriousness she would treat a pre-mission equipment check in a combat zone. Because that's what this was. Combat, just a different kind. Footsteps approached from behind. Measured, deliberate, heavy enough to be a large man, controlled enough to be someone who knew how to move. "You ready for this, Crawford?" She didn't turn around, finished securing a buckle on the training harness, then straightened and faced him. Dalton McKenzie stood 10 feet away, hands clasped behind his back. He wore his dress uniform, full ribbons, more medals than most men earned in 3 lifetimes. The physical manifestation of credibility that couldn't be faked or bought. "Yes, Master Guns." His eyes studied her with the intensity of someone who had seen too much death to waste time on pleasantries or false encouragement. "Good, because half the men watching will be looking for reasons to dismiss what happens today. The other half will be looking for confirmation that it's real." He paused. "Which half are you and Master Guns?" His expression didn't change. "Neither. I already know what you are. I'm watching to see if you know." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with those words hanging in the air like smoke. 20 minutes later, at exactly 0800 hours, General Blackwell appeared on the steel riser at the edge of the arena. His voice carried across the space without need for amplification. "Attention." 301 men came to attention as one. "At ease." They shifted to parade rest. Blackwell surveyed the assembled operators. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "This morning's evolution will test constraint survival techniques under simulated hostile conditions. Staff Sergeant Crawford will demonstrate escape and neutralization protocols. I need 2 volunteers to act as attackers." Before he finished the sentence, 2 men stepped forward from the front row. Bryce Colton, Drake Morrison. Reese looked up, saw them moving toward the mat with body language that told her everything. Confidence bordering on arrogance, the set of their shoulders, the way they looked at each other with knowing glances. This wasn't random. This was orchestrated. Blackwell's expression tightened slightly. "Petty Officers Colton and Morrison, you understand this is a controlled demonstration. No competitive force, no escalation." Colton nodded, expression professional now. "Yes, sir," Morrison added. "We'll maintain demonstration protocols." But Reese watched their hands. The way Colton flexed his fingers, the way Morrison tested his weight distribution. And in the top riser, partially hidden among the crowd, Colonel Victor Harlow stood with arms crossed. She caught his eye for just a moment, saw the ghost of a smile. He had sent them the message, had told them to test her, had positioned himself to watch the outcome. Harlow pulled out his phone, checked something on the screen, a message app. The confirmation visible for just a second before he slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Message received. Will maintain standards." From Colton's device, he had his answer. This would be over in 30 seconds, or so he thought. Reese stepped to the center of the mat. Colton and Morrison circled to flank her, one on each side. She could see it in their eyes now. The decision they had already made, the belief that they were protecting the teams from compromise. She lowered herself to the mat, back down, arms at her sides, legs aligned with the marking tape, textbook-prone restraint posture, the position of maximum vulnerability, the starting point for every constraint escape drill in the manual. She looked up at Blackwell. "Ready, sir." He raised his hand. Begin. Slow phase contact. Colton moved first, but he didn't apply slow phase pressure. He came down hard, fast, full weight. His knee dropped outside her left shoulder, planted across her sternum. His forearm slammed across her collarbone like a steel bar. 230 pounds of force concentrated into a line of contact small enough to crush bone if she couldn't distribute the load. Morrison followed immediately, locked both hands around her ankles, drove his knees into her thighs, wrapped her legs in a competitive grappler hold, the kind of technique you use when you wanted to dominate someone completely. The arena went still. Every man watching knew the difference between demonstration contact and what was happening on that mat right now. This wasn't instruction. This was assault. Colton leaned close, his breath hot against Reese's face, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Show us something real, Sergeant." Morrison tightened his grip until his knuckles went white. "Yeah, break free now." Reese's eyes opened fully. Her breathing didn't spike, didn't quicken, but something behind her expression shifted. The stillness vanished. What replaced it was colder, cleaner, more dangerous. She spoke, not loudly, not with emotion, just flat, clear, unmistakable. "You are no longer inside demonstration protocol." The front row stiffened. They knew that phrase. Section 7.3 of the training manual. Code trigger for live response authorization. The moment when demonstration became survival, when controlled force became necessary force. Colton pressed harder, his full weight grinding down through her collarbone. "Quit talking and move, Sergeant." Morrison grinned, cold, confident. "Yeah, show us." Neither of them understood. Not yet. Not until it was too late. Because what they had just done was give her permission. Permission to stop demonstrating. Permission to start surviving. Her body shifted, subtle, precise. The left elbow rotated inward, finding the pocket under Colton's armpit, where nerve bundles ran close to the surface. Fingers hooked and locked. Then she moved. And the breaking started. The first thing 301 Navy SEALs would remember later was the speed. Not the violence. Not the sound. The speed. Reese's body didn't explode into action. It simply reconfigured. Like water finding a new path. Like a mechanism clicking into place. One moment she was pinned. The next moment Bryce Colton was airborne. The sound of his shoulder dislocating was sharp, final, like dry wood splitting. The kind of crack that echoed across open space and made men 3 rows back flinch because their nervous systems recognized catastrophic joint failure even before conscious minds processed it. Colton hit the mat chest first, hard enough that impact drove air from his lungs in a breathless wheeze. His face bounced against vinyl. His legs kicked once, reflexive, useless. His upper body was done, disarmed, broken. 2.1 seconds from pin to collapse. The arena gasped. 301 men, one sound, audible, shocked, involuntary. Reese didn't pause, didn't celebrate, didn't even glance at Colton writhing beside her. She rolled up from her back in a single fluid motion. Boots pivoted beneath her, left knee planted lightly. Arms came up in readiness, balanced, controlled, waiting. Drake Morrison was still locked around her ankles. His brain was 3 steps behind, still processing Colton's collapse, still trying to reconcile the image with the calm woman kneeling 2 feet away. "What the hell?" The words came strangled, confused, but his hands didn't let go. Training overrode shock. Hold position, maintain control. He yanked hard on her ankles, tried to twist her into a compromised rollover, but Reese had already shifted her weight, hips rotated off axis, not resisting his pull, redirecting it, using his momentum against him. Her left leg slid behind his wrist, precisely timed. Her heel hooked the inside of his forearm right above the ulna, where radius and ulna met in articulation that could handle compression but not lateral torque. Morrison pulled. Reese dropped. Her full body weight drove downward and inward, twisting, leveraging, turning his grip into a fulcrum. The snap was different from Colton's crack. Wetter, thicker, like a green branch torn apart. The radius fractured mid-shaft. The ulna displaced. Soft tissue tore. Blood vessels ruptured internally. Morrison's body jolted backward. His hands flew off her legs as if electrified. His face twisted between confusion and agony. Mouth opening. Sound coming late. Delayed. My arm. My arm. My... He staggered back 2 steps, cradling his forearm against his chest, elbow bent at an angle that made men in the front row look away. Reese rose slowly, deliberately. Boots found the mat with quiet precision. Back straightened. Breathing remained even steady controlled. She didn't step toward Morrison, didn't lunge. Simply pivoted on her rear foot, re-establishing stance. Morrison's breathing turned shallow, rapid, body going into shock. He half-stepped forward, like maybe he could still salvage this. Reese moved before he could commit. 1 step forward, fluid, measured. She lowered herself beside him, placed 1 palm on the back of his neck. Not aggressive, stabilizing. The other hand braced his damaged elbow, preventing him from jerking away and making the injury worse. Her voice was neutral, clear, clinical. Stop resisting. Your arm is no longer stable. Morrison froze, not from fear, from recognition. She wasn't retaliating. She was containing him, protecting him. She had stopped the break at the joint, hadn't driven it through the shoulder, hadn't shattered the wrist. She had held back. The 301 men watching saw it. So did Morrison. For the first time since stepping onto that mat, the smirk was gone, replaced by something quieter, something that looked like understanding. This hadn't been luck. This had been control, measured, clinical. Dangerous only because it could have gone so much further and didn't. No one moved. Not a twitch, not a whisper, not a single boot shuffling. 301 Navy SEALs stood frozen, jaws slack, eyes wide. 2 men down, both incapacitated, one clutching a dislocated shoulder, the other cradling a fractured forearm, both making sounds that weren't quite screams but weren't quite words, and the woman standing between them looked like she'd just finished a training drill. Reese stepped back 3 paces, came to parade rest, boots aligned, hands clasped behind her back. Her breathing hadn't spiked. Her face showed no emotion. She turned toward General Blackwell. Medical response required for both attackers, sir. That was all she said. Just procedure. Just the next logical step. And in the risers standing among 300 shocked operators, Dalton McKenzie allowed himself the smallest smile. She had just shown them what precision over power actually meant. In the top riser, Colonel Victor Harlow's face had gone pale. His carefully constructed trap had just collapsed, and 301 witnesses had seen every second of it. The medics arrived within 90 seconds. 2 teams, 4 personnel, moving with practiced efficiency across the arena floor, while 301 Navy SEALs remained frozen in the risers, still processing what they had witnessed. The lead medic was older, graying at the temples, tattoos running up both forearms, the kind of ink that spoke to decades of service. He dropped to his knees beside Colton, first began emergency stabilization, checking vitals, bracing joints, establishing baselines before transport. But even as he worked, his eyes kept flicking up toward Reese, quick glances, uncertain. Like he wasn't sure whether to treat her as the instructor who had just demonstrated a technique or the operator who had just put 2 men down hard enough to end careers. The second medic worked on Morrison, younger, less experienced. His hands moved competently, but his face was pale. He'd seen training injuries before, but not like this, not with this kind of surgical precision. Reese stood at parade rest, watching, ready to assist if needed, but giving the medics space to work. The older medic finished his initial assessment of Colton, looked up at Reese. Recognition sparked in his eyes. "North Atlantic," he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear over the low murmur spreading through the crowd. "You're the one who saved Kowalski and Captain Blackwell. Held your breath 93 seconds. Reese gave him a look, sharp, brief, the kind of look that said don't. The medic got the message, went back to his work. But the words had been spoken, and in an arena filled with 301 men standing close enough to hear a whisper, information traveled fast. The murmur started in the front row. Low, rippling outward like a stone dropped into still water. North Atlantic. The sub collapse. She saved 2 guys while pinned herself. Heard she nearly drowned. The context was shifting, transforming. 60 seconds ago, most of these men saw Reese Crawford as a reassigned instructor, someone who'd been shuffled to Triton for reasons no one quite understood. Now they were hearing something different, a story that carried weight in their world. Divers saved under pressure, life or death decisions made in collapsing structures, with water rising and oxygen failing, and she'd held. In the third row, a veteran SEAL with silver hair and more combat ribbons than most men earned in a career leaned toward the operator beside him. His voice was quiet but certain. That wasn't power, that was clinical precision. The words carried, spread, reverberated through the formation like an echo. Clinical precision. That was what they'd witnessed. Not a brawl, not a fight, just anatomy, physics. Leverage applied with understanding of exactly how joints failed and exactly how much force was required to disable without destroying. The medics lifted Colton onto a stretcher. He was conscious but barely, face pale, sweating. Good arm clutched across his chest while his injured arm lay strapped and immobilized. They moved him carefully toward the waiting ambulance, each step measured to avoid jostling damaged joints. Morrison refused the stretcher, stood on his own, walked under his own power with 1 medic on each side supporting him, forearms splinted and wrapped, held against his chest in a sling. His face was a mask of pain and something else, something that looked like shame. As he passed Reese, he stopped, just for a second, met her eyes, opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closed it again, nodded once, small, almost imperceptible. Then he kept walking. General Blackwell stood at the edge of the arena, clipboard hanging loose in his hand, face unreadable, controlled. But his eyes kept moving between Reese and the injured men and the 301 SEALs who had just watched something none of them would forget. He didn't speak. Not yet. Because what could he say? The demonstration had gone off protocol. But the fault wasn't hers. The footage would show that. The witnesses would confirm it. Colton and Morrison had escalated. She'd warned them. They'd ignored the warning, and she'd responded exactly the way the manual said she should. In the top riser, Colonel Victor Harlow stood with arms crossed, expression carefully neutral, professional, but his jaw was tight, eyes calculating. He had watched the entire sequence, had seen Colton and Morrison escalate beyond demonstration parameters, had seen Reese trigger Section 7.3, had seen her disable 2 elite operators in under 5 seconds using nothing but technique, and now he was processing, recalibrating, adjusting his strategy in response to a variable he hadn't fully anticipated. The woman he was trying to destroy had just demonstrated competence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. 301 witnesses had seen it, and the cultural weight of that collective observation was about to become a problem he couldn't solve with authority alone. The debrief room was cold, sterile, 3 chairs on one side of a metal table, 1 chair on the other, 3 cameras mounted in corners, red lights blinking, recording everything. Reese sat in the single chair, hands folded on the table, back straight, expression calm. She'd been here before. Different base, different incident, same process. Across from her sat 3 officials, Lieutenant Commander Rachel Ashford, Naval JAG, legal officer with 20 years in military law, glasses perched on her nose, tablet in front of her displaying footage from multiple angles. Master Chief Dennis Torres, SEAL Command Representative, forearms like tree trunks, face weathered by decades of sun and salt water, eyes that missed nothing, a civilian contractor, Safety Oversight Director, clipboard, pen, the bureaucrat in the room whose job was to ensure protocols were followed and liability was managed. Ashford spoke first, voice professional, measured. Staff Sergeant Crawford, at what point did the training evolution deviate from approved protocol? Reese answered immediately. No hesitation, no uncertainty. At the moment Petty Officer Colton applied full-force compression to my collarbone with his forearm, and Petty Officer Morrison locked my ankles in a competitive restraint hold. There was no indicator of controlled speed or demonstration technique. They violated simulation structure the moment contact began. Master Chief Torres leaned forward slightly. You're certain the force was competitive? Reese met his eyes. Yes, Master Chief. There was no gradual application, no technique demonstration. They initiated with combat-level pressure designed to dominate, not instruct. The safety director made notes, scribbling rapidly. Ashford tapped her tablet. The screen in front of her showed footage from camera 4. Wide angle. Clear view of the entire mat. She played it from the beginning. The footage showed everything. Blackwell giving the order. Colton and Morrison approaching. Reese assuming position. Then the slam. The lock. The immediate escalation. Crystal clear. Undeniable. Ashford paused the video. Did you issue a verbal warning before engaging countermeasures? Reese nodded. Yes, ma'am. Exact words. You are no longer inside demonstration protocol. Ashford cross-referenced something on her tablet. That phrase is in the training manual. Section 7.3, Live Response Clause. Code trigger that authorizes instructors to use necessary force when safety protocols are violated. She looked up. The phrase was said clearly, loud enough for surrounding personnel to hear. Yes, ma'am. Multiple personnel in the front row confirmed they heard it. Torres pulled up his own tablet, scrolled through something. We have preliminary statements from 27 SEALs who were present, all consistent. Instructor issued proper warning. Attackers ignored it. Response was proportional to threat. The safety director stopped writing, looked up. Was the level of force used proportional to the threat? Reese's answer was flat, clinical. I did not apply force, I redirected theirs. They created the leverage, I used their positioning against them. Both breaks occurred because they maintained pressure after being warned. The injuries are consistent with their own actions, not mine. Ashford played more footage. The break sequences slowed down, frame by frame. Colton collapsing, Morrison staggering, Reese stabilizing Morrison's arm instead of escalating further. The civilian contractor spoke for the first time. The injuries are severe. Petty Officer Colton sustained posterior shoulder dislocation, torn ulnar collateral ligament, and complete elbow hyperextension. Petty Officer Morrison sustained midshaft radius fracture and ulnar displacement with associated soft tissue trauma. He paused. That's career-altering damage. Reese didn't flinch. I stopped at joint disable. I did not drive through the shoulder, did not fracture the clavicle, did not target the wrist. I used minimum necessary force to neutralize the threat. Torres looked at her, long, assessing. Then he nodded slowly. You held back. Yes, Master Chief. You could have done worse. Yes, Master Chief. Silence. The cameras kept recording. The red lights kept blinking. Then the door opened. Everyone turned. Colonel Victor Harlow stepped inside. Dress uniform. Ribbons catching fluorescent light. He moved with practiced confidence. Lieutenant Commander, Master Chief, apologies for the interruption. I'm assuming temporary oversight of this evaluation per Joint Command protocols. Ashford's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind her eyes. Colonel Harlow, we were just reviewing. I've reviewed the footage, Harlow interrupted. Voice smooth, professional. While Staff Sergeant Crawford appears to have followed technical protocols, I have concerns about judgment and temperament. 2 operators suffered career-threatening injuries. The optics alone warrant caution. Torres straightened slightly. Colonel, the evidence clearly shows. I understand what the evidence shows, Master Chief, but this facility operates under Joint Command protocols. Naval Special Warfare has oversight authority here, and I'm exercising it. He turned to Reese, expression professionally concerned, but his eyes were cold, calculating. Sergeant Crawford, this isn't punitive, it's procedural. We need to ensure complete thoroughness before reinstating training authority. I'm suspending you from all instructor duties pending final investigation. I'm sure you understand. Reese held his gaze, said nothing, because there was nothing to say. He had the authority. He was using it, and fighting him here would only make her look insubordinate. She stood, came to attention. Copy that, sir. Dismissed. She turned and walked out, feeling Harlow's eyes on her back the entire way. The hallway outside was empty. Fluorescent lights hummed. Her boots echoed against tile as she walked toward the exit. She had just demonstrated competence that 301 witnesses could verify, and Harlow had suspended her anyway, because this wasn't about competence. This was about control. She reached the exit, pushed through the door, stepped out into late afternoon light, and heard the PA system crackle to life. Medical emergency, rappelling tower 3, compound fracture, possible arterial involvement. All available medical personnel respond immediately. Reese stopped, stood there for exactly 3 seconds. She was suspended, confined to quarters pending investigation. Responding to this call would violate Harlow's direct order. She grabbed her medical kit from her locker and started running. The scene at Rappelling Tower 3 was chaos. A trainee lay at the base of the tower. Left leg bent at an angle that defied anatomy. Mid-shaft femur. Bone visible through torn fatigues. White and sharp and wrong. Blood spreading across the ground in a pool growing too fast. Too dark. 2 instructors knelt beside him. One applying pressure with both hands. The other on a radio calling for medevac. 8 minutes out. 8 minutes. The trainee didn't have 8 minutes. Reese dropped to her knees beside them. Kit already open. Hands moving before conscious thought caught up. How long has he been down? 3 minutes. Fell from 40 feet. Rope failed. She assessed the leg. Compound fracture. Femur snapped clean through. Sharp bone edges visible. Heavy bleeding but not arterial. Not yet. But the femoral artery ran right alongside that bone. And if a bone fragment shifted wrong, if it punctured the vessel, he'd bleed out in under 2 minutes. One of the instructors looked at her. Sergeant Crawford, you're suspended. Colonel Harlow said, Harlow can court-martial me later. Right now this kid bleeds out or I stabilize him. Which do you prefer? The instructor hesitated for maybe half a second, then moved aside. Reese worked fast, clinical, precise. I need manual traction. Grab above the knee. Grab the ankle. Pull straight. Don't let it rotate. They followed her instructions. Grabbed. Pulled. The trainee screamed. Back arched. Entire body went rigid with pain. But the bone fragments realigned. The bleeding slowed. Reese pulled splinting materials from her kit. Gauze. Pressure bandages. Rigid braces. Her hands moved with speed that came from treating combat casualties in conditions where hesitation meant death. She packed the wound. Applied the splint. Wrapped it tight enough to stabilize without cutting circulation. Checked distal pulse. Found it. Strong. Good. The artery was intact. The trainee's breathing was rapid. Shallow. Face pale. Shock setting in. She looked at his face. Made eye contact. Stay with me. You're going to be fine. Medevac is 6 minutes out. Your leg is stabilized. You're not going to lose it. But I need you to stay awake. Talk to me. What's your name? Garrison, he gasped. Lieutenant Garrison Harlow. The world stopped. Reese's hands froze for maybe 1/10 of a second, then continued working, continued stabilizing, continued doing the job, even as her brain processed the implications. Garrison Harlow, Colonel Victor Harlow's nephew. One of the instructors leaned close, whispered, Sergeant, that's the colonel's nephew, his sister's kid. She had just saved the nephew of the man trying to destroy her career, the nephew of the man responsible for 10 deaths, the nephew of the man who had sent Colton and Morrison to test her, who had suspended her from training, who was here specifically to ensure she failed. And now she was holding his nephew's life in her hands. Everything slowed down, crystallized, became absolutely clear. She could walk away, let the other instructors handle it. She could stabilize the leg wrong. Make a mistake that wouldn't be obvious until later. She could do nothing and let karma deliver its verdict. Her father's voice spoke in her memory, not words he'd said to her directly, but a story he'd told once about Desert Storm, about treating a wounded Iraqi soldier who had killed an American soldier hours earlier, about making the choice to save a life even when that life belonged to someone who had taken other lives. We don't leave wounded, not enemy, not ally, not ever. That's the line that separates soldiers from killers. Reese kept working, adjusted the splint, verified circulation again, kept Garrison conscious with questions about his home, his family, his training. Where are you from, Garrison? Texas, San Antonio. Good, keep talking. Tell me about San Antonio. He rambled, half coherent, but conscious, engaged, fighting. The medevac helicopter appeared over the tree line, rotors beating air into submission. It landed on the adjacent pad 50 yards away. Flight medics jumped out with a stretcher. Reese gave them the handoff briefing. Quick, precise. Lieutenant Garrison Harlow, 22 years old, compound midshaft femur fracture, manual traction applied, bleeding controlled, distal pulse strong, femoral artery intact, splint stabilized. He's been conscious and responsive for the past 6 minutes. Vitals stable but showing early shock indicators. The flight medics loaded Garrison onto the stretcher, lifted him, moved toward the helicopter. Reese stood, wiped blood from her hands with gauze, repacked her kit. Her breathing was steady. Her hands didn't shake. 300 yards away, standing near the administrative building, Colonel Victor Harlow had watched the entire sequence. His face was unreadable, expression locked down, but his eyes followed Reese as she walked back toward the barracks. He stood there for a long time after she was gone, just standing, just processing. His nephew, injured, bleeding, minutes from death, saved by the woman he was here to destroy. 40 hours later, Reese stood outside the hearing room at 0730. The corridor was empty, quiet, the kind of silence that came before storms. She wore dress uniform, ribbons aligned, boots polished, her father's Fairbairn Sykes knife secured in a concealed sheath at her belt. Hidden but present. The door opened. Master Chief Torres appeared. Sergeant Crawford, the board is ready. She walked in. The room was larger than she expected. 7 chairs arranged behind a raised table, all occupied, all eyes turning toward her. Admiral Preston Wainwright sat in the center chair, 2-star, Gulf War veteran, 64 years old, the kind of officer whose presence commanded respect because it had been earned through decades of competence rather than purchased through politics. To his right sat General Blackwell. To his left, 2 captains she didn't recognize. The remaining 3 seats were filled by senior NCOs representing different branches. Colonel Harlow sat at a separate table to the side, observer status, but his presence filled the room like a physical pressure. Reese came to attention, saluted. Staff Sergeant Reese Crawford reporting as ordered, sir. Wainwright returned the salute. At ease, Sergeant. Please be seated. She sat, hands folded in her lap, back straight. Wainwright opened a folder in front of him. Sergeant Crawford, we've reviewed footage of the training demonstration. We've collected statements from personnel present. We've assessed medical reports on the injured parties. And we've examined your service record. He paused. Before we proceed with findings, Colonel Harlow has requested the opportunity to present concerns regarding your conduct and suitability for instructor duties. Harlow stood, moved to the center of the room, placed a tablet on the table facing the board. Admiral, gentlemen, Staff Sergeant Crawford is technically proficient. No one disputes that. But competence alone doesn't qualify someone for instructor duties. This evaluation was designed to assess judgment, temperament, the ability to operate within established parameters. He tapped his tablet. A video appeared on the screen behind him. The demonstration footage. The footage shows Sergeant Crawford responding to protocol violations with excessive force. Yes, she cited Section 7.3. Yes, she issued a warning. But the severity of injuries sustained by 2 elite operators raises serious questions about proportional response. He advanced to another slide. Furthermore, Sergeant Crawford violated direct suspension orders by responding to a medical emergency at Rappelling Tower 3. While the outcome was positive, my nephew survived thanks to her intervention, the violation demonstrates an unwillingness to follow command authority. He turned to face Reese directly. This is a pattern. 18 months ago, Sergeant Crawford refused to sign a modified after-action report despite direct orders from a superior officer. That refusal led to her reassignment to Triton, and now given another opportunity to demonstrate discipline and adherence to command structure, she again chose to prioritize her own judgment over established authority. Harlow's voice carried absolute certainty. I recommend Sergeant Crawford be removed from instructor consideration and reassigned to administrative duties where, Her independence won't compromise operational integrity. He sat down. The room was silent. Then the door at the rear opened. Everyone turned. Dalton Mackenzie entered. Fatigues, folder under his arm, expression carved from granite. Behind him came three more men, all senior SEALs, all carrying folders. Wainwright's eyebrows rose slightly. Master Gunnery Sergeant Mackenzie, this is a closed hearing. With respect, Admiral, I have evidence material to this proceeding, evidence that the board needs to see before making findings. Wainwright studied Dalton for a long moment, then nodded. Proceed. Dalton moved to the center of the room, set his folder on the table, opened it. Admiral, I've been collecting evidence for 10 years regarding systematic equipment procurement fraud, substandard materials, falsified inspection reports, contractor kickbacks, the kind of corruption that gets operators killed. He pulled out photographs, set them on the table facing the board. 6 training deaths between 2009 and 2017, all attributed to equipment failure, all involving gear approved by the same procurement officer. He pulled out financial records. $1.6 million in payments from a single contractor to that same procurement officer between 2008 and 2017. He pulled out after-action reports. Operation Copper Dune, 2011. 4 SEALs killed when communications equipment failed during a coordinated ambush. Equipment approved by the same procurement officer. He pulled out a phone record printout. Encrypted messages sent from Colonel Harlow's device to petty officers Colton and Morrison 40 minutes before the demonstration. The message read, "Maintain standards tomorrow. Don't let shortcuts compromise the teams." He looked at Harlow. Coded language with plausible deniability. But 3 independent cyber forensic analysts traced the messages directly to your device, Colonel. He pulled out one more document, yellowed with age. A JSOC complaint filed by Colonel Garrett Crawford in 2010, buried within 72 hours by the investigating officer. Dalton looked directly at Harlow. The procurement officer, the investigating officer, the man who's been covering this up for 13 years. Colonel Victor Harlow. The room exploded. Harlow surged to his feet. This is outrageous, Admiral. These are baseless accusations. Sit down, Colonel. Wainwright's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Cold, absolute. Harlow sat. Wainwright studied the documents, passed them to the officers beside him. Each one reviewed the evidence in silence. Then Wainwright looked at Dalton. Master Guns, these are serious allegations. Do you have corroboration? I have testimony from 17 operators who survived equipment failures. I have metallurgy reports proving substandard materials. I have financial records proving payments. And I have the support of every SEAL who was present at Staff Sergeant Crawford's demonstration. The door opened again. A captain entered, handed Wainwright an envelope. Admiral, as requested. Wainwright opened the envelope, read the contents. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He looked at Harlow. Colonel Harlow, are you aware that the Inspector General has been investigating equipment procurement irregularities for the past 9 months? Harlow's face went pale. No, sir. Are you aware that this investigation was triggered by evidence submitted anonymously following the North Atlantic incident 18 months ago? Silence. Are you aware that this investigation has identified 10 operator deaths linked to equipment failures involving gear you personally approved? Harlow said nothing. Wainwright continued. Colonel Garrett Crawford's death in 2018 has been re-examined. New toxicology analysis indicates the presence of oleander extract, a natural cardiac poison that mimics heart attack symptoms. The case has been referred to NCIS as a potential homicide. The room went dead silent. Furthermore, your nephew, Lieutenant Garrison Harlow, provided voluntary testimony to investigators 3 weeks ago. He detailed discrepancies between your reported income and observable assets, offshore accounts, unexplained luxury purchases, a pattern consistent with unreported income. Wainwright stood. Colonel Victor Harlow, you are hereby suspended from all duties pending completion of the Inspector General investigation and NCIS criminal inquiry. Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents are waiting outside to escort you into custody. The door opened. 2 NCIS agents in dark suits entered. Harlow stood. face a mask of rage and disbelief. He looked at Reese. Your father was a fool. He should have stayed quiet. Reese stood, came to attention, voice clear, steady. My father was a Marine who died with his integrity intact. You'll die in prison with nothing but shame. The NCIS agents moved forward, placed Harlow in handcuffs. As they led him toward the door, Dalton stepped forward, removed the Gulf War challenge coin from Reese's hand, where she'd been holding it. He pressed it into Harlow's chest. This coin survived 3 wars, Colonel. It represents honor, something you'll never understand. This is for my grandson Camden, and for Garrett Crawford, and for every operator who died because you chose profit over integrity. He took the coin back. Harlow was led from the room. The door closed. Wainwright looked at Reese. Sergeant Crawford, the board finds no violation of protocol or excessive force in your demonstration. Section 7.3 was properly invoked. Your response was proportional and controlled. He paused. Furthermore, your actions at Rappelling Tower 3 are commended. You saved a life despite personal and professional risk. That's the mark of a true operator. He stood. The entire board stood with him. Effective immediately, you are promoted to Gunnery Sergeant. You are assigned as head instructor for the newly established Cross-Branch Integration Training Program, and you are recommended for the Navy Cross for your actions during the North Atlantic incident. Reese came to attention, saluted. Thank you, sir. Wainwright returned the salute, then did something unexpected. He walked around the table, extended his hand. Reese shook it. Your father would be proud, Gunnery Sergeant Crawford. You finished what he started. That takes courage most people don't possess. 6 months later, Triton Proving Grounds had changed. New construction dotted the landscape, expanded training facilities, updated equipment, and 2 new buildings that stood at the center of the base like monuments. The first building was a leadership training center, modern, well-equipped. Above the entrance, carved into stone, Colonel Garrett Crawford Leadership Center, dedicated to the principle that integrity is not negotiable. The second building was a tactical training facility, state-of-the-art ranges, simulation rooms. Above its entrance, Corporal Camden Mackenzie Memorial Range, in honor of those who gave their last full measure. 6 months had passed since Colonel Victor Harlow's arrest. The court-martial had been swift, the evidence overwhelming. 13 counts of fraud, 10 counts of negligent homicide, 1 count of first-degree murder in the death of Colonel Garrett Crawford. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The verdict took 40 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Harlow was sentenced to life imprisonment at the United States Disciplinary Barracks, Fort Leavenworth. No possibility of parole, dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all rank, pay, and benefits. His name had been removed from every building, every plaque, every record of commendation, as if he'd never existed, as if the only thing left of Victor Harlow was the lesson his corruption had taught: integrity could be buried for a time. But the truth always surfaced, and when it did, justice followed. On a clear morning in early spring, Reese stood in the parade ground with 18 female Marines and SEALs. The first integrated training cohort, hand-picked, highly qualified. Bryce Colton and Drake Morrison stood off to the side. Both recovered. Colton's shoulder would never have full range of motion again. Morrison's forearm bore surgical scars that would be permanent reminders. Both had requested reassignment as assistant instructors. Not because they'd been ordered to, because they'd asked to. During Reese's first training session with the female cohort, Morrison had approached her privately. Gunnery Sergeant, I need to say something. Reese had looked at him, waiting. That day on the mat, Colton and I thought we were protecting the teams, thought we were maintaining standards. But we were wrong. We were protecting our assumptions, our prejudices. He'd paused. You held back. You could have ended my career, my life. You chose not to. That's a standard I want to live up to. Colton had echoed the sentiment an hour later. Teach us, he'd said simply. Teach us to be better. And now they stood in formation with the female operators they'd once doubted, learning the same techniques, held to the same standards, proving that redemption, like integrity, wasn't about where you started. It was about where you chose to go. In the reviewing stand, Dalton Mackenzie sat beside General Blackwell and Admiral Wainwright, 3 generations of warriors. Watching the future take shape, the ceremony was simple, a dedication, a speech, the unveiling of a memorial plaque. When it came time for remarks, Reese approached the podium, looked out at the assembled operators. "The men who built this place understood something fundamental," she said, voice carrying across the parade ground. "They understood that being an operator isn't about being the biggest or the strongest. It's about being the most precise, the most disciplined, the most committed to doing what's right even when it's hard." She paused. "My father died fighting for that principle. Master Guns Mackenzie lost his grandson to people who abandoned it. And every operator whose name is on that memorial wall paid the price when corruption was allowed to flourish." She looked at each student in turn. "We're here to make sure it never happens again, to prove that the standard isn't about who you are. It's about what you can do, how well you can do it, and whether you'll maintain your integrity when everything else is stripped away." She pulled out her father's photograph, the one she'd carried for 6 years, looked at it one last time, then placed it in the display case beside the knife and Dalton's first challenge coin. "For the men who came before, for the ones who'll come after, and for everyone who believes that doing what's right is worth more than doing what's easy." After the ceremony ended, after the formations dispersed, after the generals departed, Dalton found Reese standing alone at the memorial wall. She was looking at her father's photograph, at the knife, at the challenge coin. "He'd be proud," Dalton said quietly. Reese didn't turn around. "You think so, Master Guns?" "I know so. I served with Garrett for 15 years. Watched him make the hard calls. Watched him choose integrity over advancement every single time." Dalton stepped beside her, looked at the display. "He told me once that the hardest part of being a Marine wasn't the combat. It was knowing that doing the right thing might cost you everything, and doing it anyway. He paid that price. He did. But he also left you something more valuable than any inheritance. He left you the example, and you followed it." Reese finally looked at him. "We followed it, Master Guns, you and me. We finished what he started." Dalton nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a second challenge coin, identical to the one in the display case. "I had two made during the Gulf War, gave one to your father in 2003 Fallujah. Told him it represented a promise that we'd always watch each other's backs. He kept it until he died." He pressed the coin into Reese's hand. "Now I'm giving you mine. Same promise. Different generation. You're not alone in this fight, Gunnery Sergeant. You never were." Reese's fingers closed around the coin, and for the first time in 6 months she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since her father's funeral. Peace. Semper Fi, Master Guns. Semper Fi, Gunny. The sun rose higher, light spilling across the parade ground, illuminating the memorial, the buildings. The operators assembled to carry the mission forward. And somewhere in whatever place old warriors went when their battles were finally done, Garrett Crawford looked down at his daughter and smiled. She had finished it. She had proven them wrong. She had shown 301 Navy SEALs that the most dangerous person in the room might be the one they underestimated, the wrong woman, who turned out to be exactly right.